She married a stranger to save her sister's life. She never imagined that stranger would be the most dangerous man in Chicago, or that within months he would trap her in a lie that would bind her to him forever. "I'm leaving you, Adrian. You can't keep me here," Clara sobbed, her trembling hands instinctively covering her slightly rounded stomach. Adrian didn't flinch. He simply stepped closer and locked the heavy mahogany door. "You're carrying the Voss heir," he said quietly. "I got you pregnant on purpose, Clara. You're mine forever now." Clara Bennett had survived 24 years of life by mastering the art of being invisible. At 5'4" and carrying 230 pounds of soft, unapologetic curves, the world had always been quick to either scrutinize her or look straight through her. In the opulent, terrifying world of the Voss family, being looked through wasn't just a preference. It was a survival tactic. For the past 2 years, Clara had worked as a maid in the Voss estate, a sprawling, heavily fortified limestone mansion nestled deep in Chicago's most exclusive district. She wasn't blind. She knew exactly who paid her exorbitant weekly salary in crisp, untraceable $100 bills. She knew why she had been forced to sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement drawn up by the city's most ruthless defense firm. And she certainly knew why her duties occasionally included scrubbing crimson stains out of imported Persian rugs at 3 in the morning. The Voss family ran Chicago, and Adrian Voss, the 32-year-old newly crowned head of the syndicate, ran the Voss family. Adrian was a man carved from ice and violence, with sharp aristocratic features, piercing dark eyes, and a reputation that made hardened criminals cross the street. He moved through the mansion like a predatory ghost, usually surrounded by a revolving door of statuesque, impossibly thin socialites, women who viewed Clara as nothing more than part of the expensive antique furniture. Clara preferred it that way. Her standard black dress and white apron were her armor. Her size, she believed, made her completely uninteresting to a man who could have anyone in the world. She was wrong. It began on a freezing Tuesday evening in November. A summit had been called in the estate's grand dining room, a tense, high-stakes meeting between Adrian and the warring heads of a rival faction. The air in the house was thick with the scent of expensive cigars, spilled bourbon, and raw adrenaline. Clara's job was to stay silent, keep the crystal glasses full, and disappear into the shadows. As she moved through the room carrying a silver tray of fresh espresso, her eyes caught something wrong. One of the men, a lieutenant loyal to Adrian's bitter rival, Salvatore, had lingered far too close to the beverage station. Clara had seen the swift, almost imperceptible flick of his wrist over Adrian's cup. A faint dusting of white powder caught the dim chandelier light on the rim of the porcelain. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was just a maid. If she spoke up and was wrong, Adrian could have her thrown into the freezing waters of the lake. But as Adrian reached out his scarred, perfectly manicured hand to take the poisoned cup, Clara's instincts overrode her self-preservation. She didn't speak. Instead, she deliberately stumbled. With a loud gasp, Clara pitched forward and slammed her shoulder into the mahogany cart. The silver tray went flying. Hot espresso, broken porcelain, and whatever lethal substance had been slipped into the cup splashed across the priceless rug and directly onto Adrian's polished shoes. The room erupted. 3 men drew concealed firearms in a single synchronized heartbeat. Clara squeezed her eyes shut and dropped to her hands and knees in the steaming puddle, her whole body shaking. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Voss," she cried out, her voice trembling. "I'm so clumsy. Please," I tripped on the hem of my apron. The silence that followed was deafening. The men looked to Adrian, waiting for the order to drag the careless maid out by her hair. But Adrian didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his dark eyes narrowing, not at the mess, but at the white powder now fizzing faintly against the spilled liquid on the floor. A very specific, highly toxic reaction. Adrian slowly raised a hand, signaling his men to lower their weapons. He looked at the rival lieutenant, who had gone deathly pale, and then down at the terrified woman kneeling at his feet. "Get out," Adrian commanded, his voice a low, lethal baritone. It wasn't directed at Clara. It was directed at the room. Within seconds the dining hall was cleared, his enforcers dragging the screaming lieutenant with them. Once the heavy doors clicked shut, Adrian knelt down. He didn't care about the broken glass or the ruined shoes. He reached out and gently gripped Clara's chin, forcing her to look up at him. She expected rage. Instead, she found a burning curiosity in his gaze. "You didn't trip, did you, Clara?" he murmured, using her name for the first time. "I am just clumsy, sir," she stammered, tears tracking down her flushed cheeks. Adrian's thumb brushed away a tear, the gesture shockingly tender for a man who had just ordered a death sentence. "You saw him, and you put yourself in the line of fire to stop it." His eyes dropped to her trembling mouth, then back to her wide, panicked eyes. "Why?" "Because you're my employer," she whispered, desperate to look away. "And it's my job to take care of this house." Adrian rose smoothly, pulling her to her feet with a strength that belied his elegant frame. He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the soft curve of her hips, the warm, flushed skin no oversized uniform could hide. In a world full of hollow loyalty, this quiet, invisible maid had just risked her life for him without a second thought. "You're no longer cleaning the lower levels," Adrian said coldly, turning toward the door. "From now on you answer only to me. You're restricted to my private wing. Tell Margaret I said so." Clara's stomach dropped. She had saved his life, and in doing so she had stepped out of the shadows, and Adrian Voss had finally seen her. The move into Adrian's private quarters was swift and suffocating. Clara went from being a ghost in a bustling mansion to a captive bird in a gilded, terrifyingly quiet cage. The third floor of the estate was Adrian's sanctuary, impenetrable, accessible only by a private elevator that required a biometric scan. For the first few weeks, Clara tried to keep her professional distance. She ironed his shirts, arranged his meals, kept his massive, cold bedroom immaculate. But the dynamic had shifted for good. Adrian was always there. He began working from his private study instead of downtown, watching her with heavy, unblinking eyes as she dusted the shelves or straightened his pillows. The attention made Clara intensely self-conscious. She was acutely aware of her size, constantly tugging at her uniform, trying to hide the soft curve of her stomach and the thickness of her thighs. But Adrian's gaze never held disgust. It held a dark, consuming hunger that frightened her far more. He began leaving gifts. First small things, a box of imported chocolates left on her cleaning cart. Then it escalated. Her scratchy uniforms were quietly replaced with custom-made silk and cotton dresses that hugged her curves instead of hiding them. When she tried to refuse them, Adrian simply had the old uniforms burned. Clara knew she had to leave. The air around him was too thick, the unspoken tension too heavy. One evening, after gathering her courage, she knocked on the door of his study. "Mr. Voss," she began, clutching a typed resignation letter in her sweaty hands. "I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice. I appreciate everything, but I need to move on." Adrian was seated behind his massive desk, nursing a glass of aged whiskey. He didn't look surprised. He took a slow sip, his eyes tracking her nervous, shifting weight. "Is that so?" he asked softly. He pressed a button on his desk, bringing up a secure feed on his monitor, then turned the screen toward her. "Where will you go, Clara?" "Back to the damp basement apartment, the one owned by Fairview Holdings." Clara froze. "How do you know my landlord?" "I don't know your landlord, Clara. I am your landlord. I bought the building 3 weeks ago." Adrian stood and paced slowly around the desk like a panther cornering its prey. "I also happen to know that your sister Grace in Seattle just received an anonymous grant that paid off her medical debts entirely. I'm a very thorough man. I protect what belongs to me." "I don't belong to you," Clara gasped, stepping back as he approached. Panic flared in her chest. "You can't do this. I'm just a maid. I'm heavy. I'm plain. I'm nobody to you. Why are you doing this?" Adrian stopped inches from her, the scent of sandalwood and danger rolling off him in waves. He reached out, settling his hands firmly on her waist, his fingers curling possessively into the soft flesh of her hips. "You think your size repulses me," he whispered fiercely, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. "You think I want those hollow women who look at me and see only a bank account? I look at you and I see warmth. I see loyalty. I see a woman who threw herself in front of a bullet for a man she barely knew. You are soft, Clara. You are real. And you are exactly what I need to anchor me to this earth before the violence of my life drags me under." Clara trembled, tears spilling over her lashes. Adrian, please. I don't belong in your world. You belong wherever I put you, he corrected smoothly, his thumbs tracing the curve of her waist. You can't leave, Clara. Your lease is canceled. Your sister is safe because of my money. But if you run, my protection vanishes. Stay. Let me take care of you. Be mine. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum wrapped in velvet. That night marked the end of Clara the Maid. Defeated and overwhelmed by a terrifying mixture of fear and undeniable longing, she surrendered. When Adrian came to her later that night, there were no more barriers between them. He worshipped every soft inch of her body that she had spent her life trying to hide, until she forgot her fears, forgot the danger surrounding her, and lost herself completely in him. It became their routine. By day she remained quietly in his quarters. By night she shared his bed, tangled in silk sheets, and his unyielding embrace. He was obsessed, almost consumed, with the need to keep her near. But Clara still held onto a secret, desperate hope of escape. She quietly saved the cash she found in his pockets, planning to flee whenever he let his guard down. And she took her birth control pill every single morning, determined not to tie herself permanently to a man whose enemies were constantly plotting his death. What Clara didn't know was that a man like Adrian Voss never left anything to chance. 2 months into her captivity, exhaustion hit her. At first, she blamed the stress of her secluded life. But then came the morning sickness, the violent nausea that left her clinging to the edge of the bathroom sink. One quiet Monday morning, Clara stood in the center of the bathroom, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the plastic test. 2 pink lines stared back at her. Pregnant, she whispered, the blood draining from her face. No, 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 no. I take my pills. I never miss a day. Frantically, she tore open her toiletry bag and pulled out the circular case of her birth control. She popped one of the tiny white pills out and crushed it between her fingernails. Instead of the bitter, chalky medication she was used to, it crumbled easily into a sweet, familiar dust. Sugar. They were sugar pills. The realization hit her like a freight train. The lock on the door clicking open made her gasp. Adrian stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed, his eyes dropping immediately to the test in her trembling hand. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his lips. The trap hadn't just closed. It had locked permanently. You're a monster, she whispered, backing away until her spine hit the cold marble of the bathroom counter. I trusted you, he corrected, closing the distance between them and caging her in with his arms braced on the marble on either side of her hips. And I secured my investment. Did you really think I would let you slip away, saving cash from my pockets to fund some grand escape to an ordinary life? You are meant for this empire. You are meant for me. He rested a broad palm gently against the soft curve of her belly. A shiver tore through her. The terrifying truth was that beneath her panic and outrage, some dark, shameful part of her felt anchored by his possessiveness. Life in the mansion shifted overnight. If Clara had been in a gilded cage before, it was now reinforced with steel. Adrian brought in Dr. Ethan Marsh, a top-tier obstetrician kept on the family payroll, to monitor her progress daily. Her diet was carefully managed, her stress levels closely watched. As the months passed, Clara's body changed, and to her surprise, Adrian's obsession only deepened with every change. Where the world had taught her to feel ashamed of her size, Adrian worshipped her, showering her with jewelry, draping her in custom-made maternity gowns, and rarely letting her out of his sight. But the syndicate did not stop turning just because its leader had found his queen. The organization's legitimate front, a logistics company, was bleeding money. The rival Salvatore family had begun aggressively intercepting their shipping routes. Tension within Adrian's inner circle was boiling over. His second-in-command, Marcus, a lean, calculating man who had grown up alongside Adrian, was increasingly vocal about his displeasure. Marcus despised Clara. He saw her as a glaring vulnerability, a distraction that was making their leader weak. One suffocatingly hot Friday in late July, Adrian was called away to an emergency meeting on the other side of the city to negotiate a ceasefire. He left Clara at the estate under guard, with strict orders that she was not to leave the 3rd floor. Clara was resting in the master suite reading when the power to the entire mansion suddenly cut out. The hum of the air conditioning died, and the silence of the estate became deafening. Her heart began to race. The emergency generators, which were supposed to kick in within seconds, stayed dead. The doors of the master suite swung open, and Marcus stepped in holding a silenced pistol. Two of Adrian's supposedly loyal guards dragged a third man in, bleeding and unconscious, and dropped him onto the hallway floor. Well, Marcus sneered, his eyes raking over Clara's frightened form as she pushed herself up from the armchair. Look at the boss's prize, sitting in the dark. What are you doing, Marcus? Clara demanded, forcing her voice to stay steady despite the fear running through her. Fixing a problem, Marcus spat, stepping toward her. Adrian has lost his mind. He's making reckless decisions because he's obsessed with a useless servant. Salvatore offered me a seat at his table and full control of the shipping routes. All I have to do is hand over the heir and the woman who ruined my best friend. Clara's hands flew to her stomach. Adrian will kill you. He will tear you apart. Adrian is walking into an ambush as we speak. Marcus laughed coldly. He's already dead, and you're coming with me. Fear is a powerful paralyzer, but the instinct to protect an unborn child is a force of nature all its own. As Marcus approached with the pistol raised and a cruel sneer twisting his features, he made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman in front of him. He saw a frightened, overweight woman cowering on the floor, the maid who used to scrub the baseboards, the soft, quiet thing his boss had foolishly elevated above her station. He didn't see the woman who had spent 2 grueling years invisibly memorizing every inch, every blind spot, and every security protocol of the estate while polishing its floors and dusting its cameras. He didn't realize that being overlooked was a tactical advantage. Please, Clara sobbed, her voice trembling as she faked a clumsy stumble backward. She let her knees buckle, dropping to the floor near the massive stone fireplace, wrapping her arms around her belly. Please don't hurt my baby. I'll do whatever you want. Pathetic, Marcus scoffed, lowering his guard completely. His pistol dipped toward the floor as he stepped forward, reaching out to grab her by the hair and drag her to her feet. A dog dressed up in diamonds is still a dog. Let's go, sweetheart. Salvatore is waiting. But Clara wasn't reaching for the floor to cower. Her hand shot out and closed around the heavy brass fire poker resting on the hearth. With a guttural scream fueled by pure adrenaline and a mother's fierce protective rage, she swung the rod with everything she had. It connected with the side of Marcus's knee. The sickening crack of shattering bone echoed through the room. His eyes went wide with shock before rolling back in his head as he howled in agony, his leg buckling at an unnatural angle. The pistol slipped from his grasp and clattered across the floor, out of reach. Clara didn't hesitate, didn't freeze, and didn't run. She threw her full weight forward, driving her shoulder into Marcus's chest before he could recover his balance. The impact sent him crashing backward, his head slamming against the edge of the marble coffee table. He slumped to the floor, unconscious, a dark stain spreading across the rug beneath him. Panting, her chest heaving, Clara scrambled to her feet and lunged for the discarded gun, wrapping her shaking hands around the cold steel grip. Her heart was hammering, but her mind was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Footsteps pounded in the corridor. The 2 guards, alerted by the crash, were rushing toward the open doors of the master suite. Clara stepped over Marcus's unconscious body and remembered the hidden security panel concealed behind a large painting in the outer corridor, a fail-safe system built entirely separate from the main power grid, designed by Adrian for worst-case scenarios. She sprinted for the wall, her silk dress billowing around her ankles, tore the painting down, and slammed her palm against the glowing manual override button just as the first guard rounded the corner, weapon raised. Instantly, the estate's defenses roared to life. Reinforced shutters slammed down over the windows, plunging the room into twilight, while heavy steel barriers slid out of the walls and sealed shut with a deafening clang a fraction of a second before the guards could break through. Clara stood on the safe side, separated from the armed traitors by bulletproof glass and steel mesh. They shouted and pounded on the barrier, locked out completely, cut off from their prize and from their escape route. Clara backed slowly away, the pistol still in her hands. She had secured the perimeter. The air was safe. Now she just had to wait for Adrian to return. The adrenaline slowly gave way to a cold, resolute calm she had never felt before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a mother, a survivor, and the one holding this house together. She walked back into the suite, grabbed a pair of heavy curtain ties, and bound Marcus's wrists and ankles to the legs of a chair. For agonizing hours later, the shutters finally lifted and the blast door slid open. Adrian strode into the master suite, flanked by 3 of his most loyal men. He was a terrifying sight, his suit torn, his knuckles bruised, his shirt soaked in blood that wasn't his own. He had survived the ambush by the skin of his teeth, dealt with the traitors on the spot, and torn through the city to get back. The moment communications to the estate had gone dark, he'd expected to find a massacre. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with disbelief. The master suite looked like a war zone, but the casualties were entirely one-sided. Marcus sat bound tightly to a chair, groaning through a shattered jaw and a ruined knee, and across from him, unharmed, sitting calmly in a velvet chair with a loaded gun steady in her lap, was Clara. She looked up as he entered. Her face was smudged with soot, her dress rumpled and stained with Marcus's blood, but her eyes were remarkably calm, cold and blazing with a quiet authority that caught in Adrian's throat. "He sold you out to Salvatore," Clara said, her voice steady in the silent room. "He cut the generators to blind the cameras. I locked down the wing, trapped his men in the corridor, and kept him here for you." Adrian stared at the woman he had forcibly kept caged. He had thought of her as soft, fragile, in need of his constant protection. He had loved her warmth, but he had completely underestimated the steel that ran through her. She wasn't just his captive anymore. She had proven herself, without question, to be his equal. She had protected everything that mattered to him when his own men had failed him. Slowly, a proud smile spread across his face. The tension drained from his shoulders. He crossed the room, gently took the gun from her trembling hands, and pulled her into a crushing embrace, burying his face in her neck. "My queen," he murmured against her collarbone, his voice thick with emotion. "My brilliant, fearless queen." Marcus watched in horror, coughing through his own blood, realizing too late that the woman he had so arrogantly dismissed as an invisible servant had become the architect of his downfall. Clara rested her head against Adrian's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. She had entered this world as a ghost, forced into a gilded trap by a man who refused to let her go. But looking down at the traitor bleeding on the carpet, she realized she no longer had any desire to escape. He had trapped her, but in doing so, he had handed her the keys to an empire. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was Clara Voss, matriarch of Chicago's most feared family, and anyone who dared underestimate her again would learn exactly what that meant. If Clara's journey from an overlooked maid to a fearless matriarch kept you hooked until the very end, let me know by hitting that like button. Share this story with anyone who loves a dramatic power reversal, and subscribe for more dark romance sagas every week. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next twist.